share screen channel. Oh, huh. It's kind of weird because I can't see this. How me talk up let me chat Alex Byard under Amanchia Polo. Wana lila Ethiopia ni hoka wogala wahil dakai. Hechia miniluza hon he da wa u waki hisnucha. Ledan su balzik da ledan mochicha kapite. Mocha ake lila Ethiopia lel oaka. Mocha lemecha Alex Byard under Amanchia pe na pejuta aka oyanke da wati. Ash mitiwa he di skokpa na ni washitra Yellow Bear Canyon happy. Hell etam pe. Mish Lakota makoche et itak maya mishne. Makoche wa uyohia patakia New York, upstate New York. Kayaka na ish chusho pe Ichakman. Hechia in hell in Ichakman. Wane tu omaka shabaloka uheha Lakota makoche wagali hunilo OLC wabalawa Lakolia bikile muspemi chiche. Lakolia bikile lila ewakila. Muspemi chiche na wana kaopi chik ala oayawa etla wa muspe wichawa ke. Na kaopi chik ala oayawa ki hel in tumi na lekshi na ina hel mayawa ke. Chalila yokya worship channel. Hello relatives, my name is Alex Byard Thunder. I just wanted to introduce myself real quick before I get started, so you know who I am. Maybe some of you know me, Oganash Somaya Useche. But my name is Alex Byard Thunder. I'm Ogallala. I live in Kyle, but my family is from between Kyle and Allen Canyon, from Yellow Bear Canyon, or Tprs. My mom grew up there, my aunties and uncles. I was actually not raised there. I was born and raised in upstate New York. My dad is from over there, and I was raised with the Lakota way of life. Going to powwows, coming home every summer for ceremonies, and about 8 years ago, I decided to move home because I just wanted a stronger connection to my community and to be able to understand who I am, where I come from, on a much more just on a better understanding of who I am, and to live at home all year round, not just come home for a visit here or there, know some stories, but to actually have the experience of living here. And so I've been here 8 years now, and went to OLC. When I first moved to the res, I had a GED to my name, and that was it. I went to OLC, started learning the language, wanted to know the words to all the songs that I was singing growing up, and took on, trying to learn the language to become a speaker, and still work in progress. But in the meantime, I started teaching at Little One School, and I'm proud and happy to teach there because that's where my mom went to school, and my aunties and uncles also. So that's just a little bit about myself. Today I'm going to be talking about how to use a teaching method called Tprs in the Lakota language classroom. I learned this method, I started learning it about a little over a year ago, and implemented it in my classroom starting last school year. And so far it's been really fun for me and for my students. So I just wanted to kind of share it with you guys and show you what's available as an option if you wish to do it. So I'm not here to say this is the best way. I'm not here to convince you to do this. I'm not here to sell anything to you. Just wanted to share something that I've found fun, successful, and rewarding, and just wanted to share it. So thank you for coming and listening. Lama. starters, we asked what Tprs is, and it's a teaching method. It was founded by a Spanish teacher named Blaine Ray back in the 80s. Like, he's teaching Spanish. I believe he's retired now. But it's very different. What we see today as Tprs is very different than what he started in the 80s. And it's from him being open-minded and taking input and guidance from other mentors or other language teachers that have built onto it, added onto it. And so it's an evolving method that is, it's just growing and evolving even to this day. So it is a method of second language teaching that uses highly interactive stories to provide comprehensible input, or rich input, which we'll talk more about later. And it creates an immersion-like environment. So it's not, there's no strict, no English at all, but it does aim to have as much talk in the target language, as much communication in the target language as possible. It maximizes the input in the classroom. It creates an atmosphere of scaffolded immersion with the feeling of, I am so getting this from language learners. So what it stands for, a lot of people think it stands for total physical response, the TPR, which is a common, language teaching method. And actually it did start out like that because there's a lot of gestures and things in this method, and physical movement. But I think they changed their what it stood for to teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling. And so when we say proficiency, we're talking about the ability to comprehend a range of familiar and unfamiliar contexts. And the mission statement of Tprs is to transform the lives of teachers and students through the efficacy of this method. And I would say that for me, it's definitely changed. It's transformed my life in the sense that I have an entire different approach of teaching than I did before. Okay, so real quick, what is communication? I want you guys to think about this for maybe 30 seconds. Talk about it with whoever's sitting next to you, and then I'll hear a couple of answers of what you guys think. How would you define communication? Communication. 我是这我会错也起来打不卡，都叫卡的。Anybody got any answers for me?
Exchange of information.
Exchange of information.
Exchange of information. That's part of it for sure. Anything else to add to that?
Being on the same page.
Being on the same page.
On the same page. Oh. That's that. I'd say both of those fit into what I'm going to present here. So this is a definition provided to us by a linguist, Bill Van Patten, who's a former professor of second language acquisition and a Spanish teacher also. And he's not the founder of this Tprs stuff, but he was like a mentor to Blaine Ray, or is still. So he defines it as communication is the expression, interpretation, and sometimes negotiation of meaning in a given context. And communication has a purpose. So I'd say both of those answers, they definitely fit into this. And so we're going to talk about this part right here. Communication has a purpose. So to do all these things, but there's a purpose to it. So the purpose of communication, it should be something other than language learning. So, today we're going to learn about clothes. Like, why? Why are we going to learn about clothes? Or today we're going to learn about colors. Again, why? Why are we learning about colors? Is there a purpose for the sake of language learning alone. And so these guys would argue that doesn't fit into a purpose to communicate. If it's just for language learning, just for the sake of language learning, there's got to be something more to it. And so there could be psychosocial. It could be about building social relationships. This is kind of fitted into what you guys were talking about: cognitive, informational, sharing information, or educating people about an issue or a problem or something that's going on. Or 3, entertainment. So these are 3 purposes, 2 reasons why we communicate. And so the idea is that we want to get one of these things, or maybe more than one. That it's not like they're in separate categories. You can entertain somebody while they're giving them information and building a social relationship all at the same time. Ideally, actually, that's what you want to do with your students. But one of these should be your focus when you're talking about communicating language to your students. Okay. So then we ask another question: how is language acquired? And the idea here, there's all kinds of different theories about how language is acquired and what it takes for language to be acquired. And the one thing they all have in common is that you need input. Meaning that people need to hear the language, they need to read the language, one or the other, or both. Otherwise, you're not going to acquire it. And there's no theory that's absent of input. And so that's the one thing. Everyone, there's all kinds of different theories, and everyone has their own specialty and thing they think needs to be focused on, or method or technique. But this is the one commonality: is comprehensible input, or at least input. And then comprehensible is that's different people argue about what that means and how to make it comprehensible, and what qualifies as comprehensible and what doesn't. But basically, it means there needs to be input that your students can understand and follow along. And so the ideal language target in your classroom should be 90% in the target language, but 100% student comprehension. Now, that doesn't mean they understand every single word, but they understand the meaning, the message behind what you're saying. And so that's up to us as teachers to make it so that's 100%. We have to take that burden off of our students and help them, make it easy for them to be able to comprehend the language that we're providing. So some important questions to ask ourselves as language teachers. And if there's people in here that aren't language teachers, if you're a language learner or you're a student, these are also questions to ask yourself about how you're learning and what you can ask of your teachers, who you're learning from. Okay, so if they're not giving you input, you need to ask them. I remember without knowing any of this stuff, I remember taking a class from a Lakota language teacher, he was a fluent speaker, and I said, he kept giving us worksheets, word lists, and this and that. And so I said, I want to learn how to speak. I want to learn how to talk the language. Can you talk to me in Lakota? He looked at me and he said, you're not ready. And that kind of crushed me. And I'm glad it happened, because now as a language teacher with my students, I totally don't take that approach. From day one, they're going to be talking about that. You just have to do the work for them, or make it easy for them. And I'll show you guys how to do that a little bit. So how much time do teachers spend providing input to students? So I was in the language classes for 3 years, 4 years, and I wasn't really getting much input at all. The only input I was getting was maybe them reading the list of words they were teaching us that day. I wasn't actually hearing the language being spoken in a communicative manner with a purpose. How much time do students spend in the target language in the classroom? Again, it was none. Except for maybe reading from the workbook or from the worksheet we had. Is there a purpose to the usage of the target language? So that's again back to that purpose, the purpose to why we're doing this, besides language learning. Okay. What is input? So we have to define what do we mean when I say input. And so input, it is language that learners see or hear, so it can be reading or it could be listening. And it has to be in a communicative context. So again, I can't stress this enough, you guys. It's gotta be, we want it to be communicative. So if I tell you to repeat a word after me, it doesn't even have to be a real word. It could be a word I made up and you guys would repeat it, but that's not input when I say it, because it's not even real. There's no context, there's no communication. So repeat after me is not input. Input is language that learners attend to for its meaning, its message, while listening or reading. So they're looking for a meaning and a message. So if I'm telling you to, I don't know, to go close the door, the context is a door that's open. Maybe we're trying to start a lesson or class is getting started, so the door should be shut. And so there's a context, there's a meaning behind what I'm saying, there's a message to it. And even if you don't know the words for shut the door, you can put it together in context and do the meaning and message of what I'm saying. So here's a few things that input is not. It is not practice, not drills or repeat after me or grammar books. I'm not saying that those are bad. It's just not input. Okay. It is not output. So if you're asking your students to say something or to write something, that's good too. But it's not input. That's output. It is not explanations. It's not explanations. It's not talking about grammar, explaining the grammar. It's not talking about etymology of a word. It's not talking about breakdowns of conjugations. It's not any of these things that, whether it comes from a teacher or a textbook. Sometimes these things are helpful. I'm not trying to say these are bad. I'm just saying it's not helpful. And it is not memorization of a word list or correction of a quiz or test, trying to get them to memorize what's right and what's wrong, and this and that. Again, maybe those are helpful for some people. Flashcards are helpful for a lot. A lot of these things are, people find value in these things, and I'm not here to say that they're bad. I'm just saying they're not input, and we need input in order to acquire language. Okay, so here's what I was talking about. When input needs to be rich, and so there's an acronym here. So rich stands for repetitive. We need repetition. It needs to be interesting. We have to grab our learners. It has to be comprehensible. They have to be able to understand what's going on. And we have to use high frequency words so that they're learning words that are used in everyday conversation, that they're going to come across in the real world when they're visiting with fluent speakers. Or maybe reading a text or whatever it is. Okay, so the first key of the 4 keys is rich. So repetitive. And this is, you're gonna hear this in any kind of, pretty much in any language teaching method, stresses that we need to offer repetition to our students. Oftentimes that, it kind of goes against the next one, because when we repeat ourselves too much or repeat a word so many times, they lose interest. And so we have to be able to balance repetition and be able to keep our students interested also. So I'll talk about that a little bit. But to be repetitive in Tprs, and I'm going to show you guys how to do it and exactly what it is, but I'm just kind of leading up into the philosophies behind it. So in order to be repetitive, teachers are going to ask a series of questions about a statement. And so, for example, if you look over here, I made a little graphic. So I put this up on the screen or on the board, and I'll say, Le Hokshila Hecha. This is a boy. Le Hokshila Hecha. And then just to see if the students are listening, I'm going to ask them a yes or no question. Le Hokshila Hecha He. And they would hopefully say, and then I would repeat the correct sentence and say, Le Hokshila Hecha. So then they've heard Hokshila 3 times already. And then I'd ask them, Le Hokshila na ishwichinchala hecha. So then they heard it again. And they heard hecha a bunch of times too. And then they would hopefully say Hokshila. They'd answer the question correctly. Hechetu Hokshila hecha. Le wichinchela hecha hen is a no question. Hiya wichinchela hecha le hoshila hecha. So all this repetition is happening. They're hearing the phrase, the sentence, they're hearing the negative form, they're getting introduced to another noun, using the same verb. So it's just so much repetition. This is called circling. And I'll get into that a little bit more later too. But so circling is a form of offering that repetition. Then we're gonna have student actors. With student actors, they're like in the story that we're gonna create, and they are going to be, they're gonna use the first person form of every verb when they talk about themselves, and then they're gonna talk about the other characters in the story as well. And so I would ask, like, say my Auntie Alan is gonna be in the story, and so this is a boy, and then Alan's a boy, so Alan hokshila hecha, le hokshila hecha, Alan hokshila hecha, and then I would address him, and this is called triangling. So I'd be like, Auntie Alan. I don't know if you can respond to me right now, but that's okay if you can. And I would say, Auntie Alan, hokshila en icha hen. And then he would say, hokshila en macha. And then I would ask him about this guy. Le wichinchila hecha hen. He'd say, iya wichinchila hecha shi. And then I'd ask him about myself, throw myself in there. So we're talking about three characters. So that's why it's called triangle. So we have circling, which is circling around about a bunch of questions. And then triangle, asking about three different characters. And that's more repetition of a verb. That way we get to introduce conjugation. We're not going to call it conjugation. We're just introduce it and show them how a verb changes depending on who we're talking about. They will use the same verb with multiple parallel characters in the story, just like that, through triangling. And we'll also verify the correct answer after each question, even if students answer correctly. So if I ask you, le hokshila hecha, and a student says, or maybe they might even say the full sentence, le hokshila hecha. And then I would say, correct, I would say, hechetu, le hokshila hecha, and repeat it again. And that way they get to, it verifies that they had the correct answer, they hear the sentence again, more repetition. Okay, keeping it interesting. This is key, these are all keys, but this is like super, super important. Especially if we're teaching youth. As adults, it's all interesting to us, right? Like we're just like enthusiasts. We have a passion and a desire to learn a language. No matter what we're learning, as long as it's in Lakota, it's interesting to us, or like, it's different for adult learners. But for high school students, middle school students, even elementary students, we have to meet them where they're at and make it interesting for them. Otherwise, if they're not interested, then they're sitting around bored and they're not paying attention, and nobody's going to learn a language if they're not paying attention. It's not interesting. Now, we do have to keep in mind that we have a set of values in our culture, our global keshapoint. So we keep in mind that we have those values to kind of guide us in our content, what we talk about, what's okay to talk about, what's not. But we can, within those guidelines, there's no reason why we can't find things that are relatable and age and grade appropriate for our students. So there's three main ways that we can do this. We can personalize the input, talk about things that students are familiar with, and have an emotional connection to. Ask open-ended questions that use student answers to add details to our conversations and our stories while utilizing what is interesting to them. So for example, I had a language teacher, I guess they weren't a language teacher, they were just a kindergarten teacher, but they were trying to incorporate language. And maybe they're doing an hour of language a day or something, I don't remember, but I'm not gonna name them, but I get the story, but they asked me how they could make something interesting for a kindergartner that didn't care to learn Lakota. And I said, well, what is that? What is that kindergartner like? What are they interested in? And they said, well, they want to be a police officer. And they're always talking about wanting to be a police officer. Okay. At first I was kind of stumped, how can we make the language interesting to this student? That's all introduce each one in Lakota, talk about what they're doing, what they're wearing, or, anything, make a story out of it. With Paw Patrol characters that they already are interested in, that they know, that they like, and make it fun. And I'm not sure, I didn't follow up with them to see if they did that or not, but so that was just an idea I had off the top of my head. Right now, my son is really interested in identifying different vehicles. So he likes to identify Tusweca when he sees a police car and he makes the siren sound. Since being in Sioux Falls, he learned about the Tusweca, which is the word I learned actually too in the dictionary. It's the word for helicopter, metal dragonfly, iron dragonfly. I thought that was pretty cool. So he's learning things like that too. So I think that would have been another possibility for him. So just age appropriate. In my middle school, my students love to talk about anime characters. They love to talk about celebrities. Right now we have a story going about Dwayne Johnson, so we call him Dwayne Eon Johnson, Dwayne the Rock Johnson. So we just have fun. You gotta stay open-minded. Sometimes it's goofy and silly, but if the students are learning and they're interested, that's all that matters. Acting out the story, use student actors to dramatize the action. Use props like fake noses, toys, etc. to enhance the dramatic experience and entertain learners. And you might think right off the bat that your students are going to be, no, they're not going to do that. They're too cool to do that. They're not going to enjoy that, or they're not going to participate in it. And I've thought that myself with my students, that there's no way they're going to get them to do that. And sometimes it's true, but a lot of times they're going to surprise you. And so I kind of hesitantly ordered a buffalo puppet for my classroom, and I didn't know how I was gonna go over it. I really didn't. I thought they're gonna think it's stupid or a little kiddish because they're 6th and 7th graders, but they fight over that puppet. They want to have the puppet in their hand during class. They ask, like, can I be my turn tomorrow? And if they have the puppet, it means that they're that character in the story. So we have a buffalo in all of our stories, and we named him Kalo. And he just kind of shows up here and there. He's not even necessarily a main character. He's just like a side character that shows up. But they always want to be that character because of the puppet. So little things like that, I think, can really enhance the participation and the interest. And then of course you can incorporate music, video clips, art, find culturally relevant materials that students find interesting. And so that's, I think, like the buffalo is really a culturally relevant thing for the language classroom. I really like that we did that. Implement the use of learner-centered authentic resources and other really, so eventually what I'm trying to get my students to is to a point where I can kind of tell traditional Lakota stories to them using the vocabulary that they've learned through this method. Okay, the C in range, the third key, is comprehensible. So we have to use vocabulary that students know and easily recognize. In Spanish, there's a lot of words that are called cognates, and these are words that have the same sounds that we already know in English. So they have a lot of freebies that they get to use when they teach Spanish that we don't get with Lakota. So they have the Tprs story. They're always talking about elephants because in Spanish, elephant is elefante, and so they don't have to translate it. It's easy. Or another example is like cat is gato, or we could go on and find all these cognates in Spanish. So in Lakota, we don't necessarily have those, but we do have. Sometimes we do. We have words like bebela. Bebela, everyone knows is a baby, and so we can make stories using that. But other things that most of our students know words like woja or tinsila, or maybe they'll know shunka or matko. There's just words that everybody kind of has come to know, whether they're a speaker or not. And so I try to incorporate those common words that everyone knows and kind of use them as cognates, as freebies. Writing unknown words on the board with translation is the most efficient and effective way to make the new word comprehensible. So I usually do that. We won't say it in English. I'll just write it, or I'll either have it on a PowerPoint or write saying, that's key. Because if we say it too fast, it's just gonna go in one ear at the other, and they won't be able to catch it. So we kind of slow it down a little bit. Not like a robot, but we don't want to do syllable by syllable, but slow it down enough so that it can follow along, and let their brain kind of catch up. Using gestures, so if I say, Tongal o sneecha machuita, it's cold outside, so I'm cold, like machuita, they're gonna know what that means when you do that, if you do that every time. Machuita, and they'll get to comprehend that word from your gesture. You can also use pictures, or other techniques to aid comprehension. So I like to have the LLC posters all over my classroom, and so whenever we need, I don't know, so in our story, a lot of it's like improv, and so if I can't even think of anything, I'll just look around the room and look at a poster, and I'll say like, so and so wants, what does he want? Da Kuchina. He wants pumping checked off. He wants moccasins. So then they might not know this pumping check off word, but now we're using a word from a poster, it's a graphic, they can see what it is in the picture, it identifies it. We don't even have to translate the English right here. Pumping check off, and they'll be able to refer back there. And so, for example, I've used this year, with places. I said, I'm in Lakota country. So I said, Lakota makoche da wa'um. And so they learned the word Lakota makoche, and I actually have two posters from the LLC that on my wall, there are Lakota makoche posters. And they always, when they get to a point where they're reciting where everybody in the story is, when they get to me and where I am, they watch them all turn their heads and go look at that poster and remember how to say Lakota makoche. And after a while, I'll watch them, and then once they've said it enough times and they've heard it enough times, and they just know it, they stop turning their heads. They don't need to look anymore. Okay, and the H in rich is for high frequency words. So this again, like I said earlier, this is how we can narrow down the amount of words we teach them and make sure that the words that we're teaching them are words that they're going to hear a lot or use a lot, that are used in our language frequently. And now in order to know what words are high frequently used, we have to do some research, or we have to trust research that's already been done. And so let's look at what the Tprs people did some research, and they said that traditional textbooks attempt to teach 3,000 words per year. And this means that during the course of a school year, students on average are learning 17 words per day. That's just too much. And they're not becoming speakers from it. And so we have to limit the vocabulary that we're teaching them to a few hundred words per year, and make sure that those words are the most frequently ones that are used. Now, the New Lakota Dictionary does mark the top 1,000 most frequent words in the dictionary. I think with a triangle that looks like this. I think it's colored in. I'm not sure. I don't have a dictionary with me to make sure, double check. And then I think the top 2,000 words have a triangle or a diamond that's not filled in. So maybe somebody could, if anyone has a dictionary on hand, they can look that up and see what it says for that. But they do identify the top 1,000 frequent words and the top 2,000 frequent words, and I think that's really helpful. In addition to that, I went ahead and put together what's called a text corpus, just a collection of Lakota language texts that are actually telling stories or narrating something, and they're from authentic sources, they're from native speakers that they wrote or said and were transcribed later. And I did some research to see which verbs were the most commonly used, and the most one was said ea. And of course I looked at the different conjugations as well, and so of course the third person conjugation was the most common. But anyways, so you can see the list of most common verbs here. And this is according to this collection, which was the Lakota Eapaha book by Ivan Starr, the stories collected by Mutual, ceremonial songs by my grandpa John Roundhead and Albert Whitehat, the Lakota Berenstain Bears, scripts from the Lakota Language Consortium, letters that Nicholas Blackout wrote in a newspaper long ago, and various other stories that Peter Hill transcribed that were told by Alvin Slover. And so that's a pretty good collection of text materials there that this research is all based off of. And so these stories, the Tprs method and stories that we use, the first story I think uses 6 or 7 verbs, and out of those 6 or 7 verbs, I think all of them are in these top 1. And so that's where I was really excited and happy to see that. Okay, we got 20 minutes left, and now I'm going to kind of show you guys what Tprs is all about and how it's done. So there's a Tps recipe. Here's a link to it. I'm not going to go to it. I was going to go to it, but basically, there's this recipe or this formula called act, describe. So the first, they really like acronyms. So the A in act stands for add something to the story. So we'll add a character. So we'll say we got a story going right now with my adult class. We have a character named Joe Snaz. So we'll call him Joe Snaz. Let Joe Snaz add. So we added a character. Then the C in act stands for circle. So that's where we ask the question. So we let Joe Snaz add. And we would say, let Joe Snaz add. And we just ask a whole bunch of questions. Let Joe Snaz add. Let Joe Snaz, not Michael Jordan add. Let Joe Snaz add. Let Michael Jordan add. So it's just all that repetition, that circling. Then the T in an act stands for triangle. So one of you, the students would be Joe Snaz. So I would say ni tu add, and you would say Joe Snaz yeah. And then I would say Joe Snaz yeah, and you would say yeah, Joe Snaz yeah, Alex yeah. So that's how that would go, triangle. We're talking to each other, about the other characters. So that's the act. And then we do that again. Keep doing that by adding another character into the story. You triangle again, circle, triangle, and then describe, which is asking people to describe who's all who, and then you say Joe Snaz wants a banana, and I want a borja, and so wants wakalapi, and then so that's describing. You do that all in Lakota because you added each thing slowly, one sentence at a time in Lakota, so they should be able to say a whole paragraph in Lakota. And so the idea here is you're teaching them words first by asking them questions, and they answer in short answers, yes or no. What do I want? Or what does he want? He wants banana. Then you ask them to do triangling, and they answer full sentences. And then when they describe the whole scenario, it's a whole paragraph. They're speaking whole paragraphs. So here it is. This is where you want to eventually get them to start with that one word at a time. You add your characters, details, make sentences. They're learning words, just the vocabulary in the sentence, and then you triangle and ask each student actor to repeat or to answer in full sentences, and then with the proper conjugation, so first person, second person, third person, but you don't even need to explain that to them. You just show them how the words are used. So like watching, I want, yachi, you want, ching, he wants. And I'll show you guys how we put it. There's a little table that shows them that. And we don't have to even use the word conjugation. And then describe the situation. They'll tell about who wants what. They'll go through each character, and that's a whole paragraph. Okay. So again, you just make a statement. Joe Snaz, wakalapi, chin. Joe Snaz wants coffee. And then what I do in Spanish or in the other languages, they have them, the students will all respond with, oh. And so I changed it to Lakota to try to make it more Lakota. And I asked the students to respond with, which I means, oh, I see sadness, oh no, something bad happens in the story, or maybe he doesn't have wakalapi, so we can express sadness, but he doesn't have it. He's sad because he doesn't have a coffee. So then we'd say Shijaya, or I teach the boys, they can say how. And of course, most of them know that already, so they like saying that how. And then Shijaya, or I teach like they can say Oshti, Ushti. So just little expressions I think are really important. Then you ask a question where the students know the answer. So if I tell you that he wants coffee, wakalapi wanji, or wakalapi chi, then I would ask you a question, daku chian, what does he want? And you would know the answer. So everyone would answer with oral response. Everyone should say wakalapi. And then ask a question where the students don't know the answer. So if I ask you what Alan Wilson wants, and no, we haven't talked about that yet, then students can guess, and that's where it gets really creative and really fun. And so people can guess all the answers, and you as a teacher get to decide which one is true. So someone says, Alan, I don't know, Alan, weekly ukaka pichin. Nah, he doesn't. Yeah, weekly ukaka pichin. No, it's up to you as a teacher to decide which ones you want to pick, which details you want to stick with in the story. But it's good to validate the students every once in a while, when they shout out something and make it true. And someone says, I don't know, someone else might say something silly. Tapa wanji chin, he wants a ball. And you say, tapa wanji chin. And try to make the students, when they guess what he wants or what somebody wants or a detail, make them try to do it in the target language. If they are not at that level yet where they can come up with things on their own, limit them to maybe 2 or 3 words in English. They can also guess with proper nouns, and that's where we can really have some wiggle room. So if we're talking about places or restaurants or things like that, they can just use the name in English. And of course, we all know that our fluent Lakota speakers do that all the time. Rapid ekta wa iukan, Walmart ekta okewa niko, so and so wambalate. They throw in the proper nouns in their speech. We can figure that, and it really helps us a lot of time to follow along. So when the students are responding, you listen. Sometimes there might be silence. Sometimes there might be a weak response, and hopefully there's a strong response. But if there's a weak response or silence, it means that they're not understanding, they're not focused, that they're not engaged. So what you do is you try to be mindful about that, how they're responding, and you gotta make sure that they're understanding, and you just repeat until you start getting them to respond. And they'll pick up on the fact that you're repeating it and that you want them to understand, or you want them to respond. And most of them will start. There's always those students that are quiet, especially in Lakota country. We have our students that are really strict up. But it's a slow process. And so it's easy for us as language teachers or as speakers, especially fluent speakers, for us to go too fast when we start talking. And I think that a lot of speakers and teachers are aware of that, and they go too fast and they realize that the students aren't getting it, and then they think that that's not the way to teach because it's too much for them. And it is too much for them, but they still need that input. They still need you to speak Lakota to them and interact with them in Lakota, but they need you to do it at a slow process that they can understand, that's interesting to them, that uses high frequency verbs. And so we just have to remember to slow down and make sure that they're staying with you. And if they're not staying with you, then you repeat. And make sure that their language is strong and healthy. And this is how we do formative assessment. When student actors can answer our questions, we are assessing whether their language is strong and healthy. If there is hesitation, we keep asking the questions. Okay, and then another really awesome thing about Tprs is that you are a character in the story that you guys are making up, that you're telling, that you're creating with the students. So you are not the teacher. I mean, you are the teacher, but you are a character in the story, and you talk as the character in the story, and you interact as the character in the story. And this creates a feeling of community. communication instead of teaching. So you're not talking at the students, you're talking with the students. So stay in characters is a key factor in doing this. Okay, so we don't have too much time. We're got about 10 minutes left, but I want to kind of show you guys how this works. I don't know how we're gonna do that because I can't really hear you guys when you talk, but we'll try. Okay, so when I make, just like that, the directions before, when I make a statement, I want you to say when I ask a question to the group, when I say midaki, I'm talking to everybody. So I want you guys to answer with one word answers. So for yes, or hiya for no. And then if I ask one person a question, I want it to be in the full sentence. Midaki George Coca-Cola Warji Chin. I can't hear you guys. Okay. I know there's no microphone to everybody. George Coca-Cola Warji Chin. Midaki George Wakala Warji Chin. Hana Ishkia. Yeah, that was good. I heard everybody. Wakala Warji Chin. George Coca-Cola Warji Chin. Midaki George Coca-Cola Warji Chin. Hana Ishkia. George Coca-Cola Warji Chin. George Coca-Cola Warji Chin. Midaki George root beer na ish Coca-Cola Warji Chin. Coca-Cola, George Coca-Cola Warji Chin. Midaki George Daku Chin. And you can see up here, if you don't know Daku, we have that translated up here. So Midaki George Coca-Cola Daku Chin. George Coca-Cola Warji Chin. Midaki Dua Coca-Cola Warji Chin. George Coca-Cola Warji Chin. Midaki Coca-Cola Warji Wachin na ish George Coca-Cola Warji Chin. George Coca-Cola Warji Chin. And so that's an example of circling. Okay, so from there, we would make a character, we would make one of the students be George. So one of the students would be George, and I think I forgot to put my little table up. There's usually a little table up here that will have the verb, and it will have, it'll say I want Wachin, you want Yachin, and he or she wants Chin. And that way the students can see that they'll have to change this verb to Wachin if they want to say I want, or Yachin if they want to say you want. And you'll have to coach them with that at first sometimes. They might not notice that, and you'll show them how that changes if you don't conjugate it. But again, we don't talk about conjugation, we just do it. We just do it, we show them how the meaning. And so that would be triangling. If I made one of you characters, or one of you students would be George, and I would ask you, Coca-Cola Warji Yachin. So Alan, be George for me. Right, put you on the spot.
Alan Ishni.
Hey, that guy.
Me on George,
George Mien.
George Mien.
George, Coca-Cola Warji Yachin.
Coca-Cola Wanji Wachi.
George, root beer Warji Yachin.
Yeah, root beer Wanji Wachishni. Wanji Wachishni.
Root beer Warjini Yachishni. George, Coca-Cola Warji Wachin, na ish Coca-Cola Warji Yachin.
Coca-Cola Wanji. Mie Coca-Cola Yachishni.
Coca-Cola Warji Yachin. Mie Coca-Cola Warjini Wachishni. George, Coca-Cola Dona Yachin. yachina ish wanji yachina.
Wanji, wachi.
Ah, okay, so see, that's called triangling, and then we have other parallel characters. So we have Joe Snaz or whoever we made up. It could be or Dwayne Eon Johnson. It could be or it could be somebody could be themselves too. And you don't have to be an imaginary person or a celebrity. And then I would then ask George about the other characters, and then we'd plug in the noun. Besides Coca-Cola, they want something different. Ojaki or Team Sila. I think one of my stories I wanted Team Sila brain. So Team Sila Osumwa Wanji Wachi. And that way, that's how I incorporate culture. I just plug in little cultural items and things like that into our stories, into the parallel stories, and the students love it. I wish we had more time and I could show you guys more. There's so much more to learn about Tprs. And so I'm going to show you guys a clip here of some students I had last summer. I worked with them for only, I think like 3 weeks, but it was every day, an hour a day. And before I had them, they could not speak Lakota at all. So first, we have a student that reads a paragraph. Okay. Any of the paragraphs, anyone? She reads a paragraph and translates it to English. She's reading this bottom. Or no, she's just reading the front. Okay, so she read with pretty accurate enunciation, pretty decent flow, and I never taught the alphabet. I didn't teach the alphabet. I just exposed them to conversation, interaction, and reading came with it. Everything that we came up with in the story, I wrote down each time, and it built up to these long paragraphs. Okay, next one was a student that. Let me hear some Akishas and Lilis. And then you always get parents to encourage each other. Ghana, can you translate what she just read for us? Okay, so the student's going to translate to English. So that ensures that they're understanding, comprehending everything, and they have an understanding of syntax. So things are changed around in Lakota, and so you can't just translate word for word, but she's able to put it back into English, into good sounding English as well.
Sapa is not a superhero. Sapa is not a boy. He is not a girl. Sapa is a shuka. Oh my gosh, a dog. Sapa comes from the dog nation. He lives in Somali.
whole story to read and stuff that, as for homework, and they could read that whenever they wanted to, between classes. So here's just some research and things about why reading is really helpful. We remember things best, when they're organized with everything else we know, when they come with stories attached, rather than as isolated bits of information like word lists or flashcards. New words are learned with remarkable facility, especially in stories, when you are reading something that makes sense to you. Picking up word meanings by reading is 10 times faster than intensive vocabulary instruction. Also very specific to indigenous languages and Nakota languages, that reading is something we can do on our own at home, especially when most of us do not have access to fluent speakers 24 hours a day. I really highly recommend if anybody is interested in trying to learn this and apply it to your classroom, then try to take a Tprs training, because there's just so much to it that I couldn't really go into too much detail within the hour. But also, if you don't have the school or somebody to fund you to go through the training, I'd be more than happy to sit down with anybody and go further into detail. I also welcome people into joining my adult Tprs Lakota class on Thursday nights. We've done 2 classes so far, so there's plenty of opportunity for you to join in now. I welcome fluent speakers, learners, if you're trying to learn the language, other language teachers that are just trying to pick up the method. Anybody's welcome to come in, and hopefully have something to offer for everybody. And it's fun, and it's a good time. Like I said, we have a story about Joe Snaz, and he's in, I don't remember where exactly. It's all up to the students to, the learners to create these stories. So I know we're right at 1:03. Do we have time for questions and comments, Amanda?
Yeah. Let me see. Any questions for Alex? Let me ask Alex, they're asking if your PowerPoint is gonna be available, or how, you would be able to share it with us.
Yeah, I can make my PowerPoint available for sure. And then also, I didn't add this into the presentation, and I haven't even seen this yet, but I translated the first chapter of the Tprs books, Look Like and Talk curriculum. And so it has a total of 6 stories, PowerPoint stories with a slide for each sentence in the story. So you move at a really slow pace. I do like 1 lesson per slide. So every sentence in the story gets its own lesson, sometimes 2 lessons. And then it also comes with a worksheet. After each story is done, they do a little worksheet. And then there's also an assessment for each one, like an official formative, or not formative, summative assessment. So like tests and quizzes and stuff, if that's something you need to do or interested in doing. It comes with all that stuff. And it's a live document too, so that if people are in there and you notice any mistakes or something that should be worded differently or anything, you can let me know and I can update it. But that should be available at Tprs Books, tprsbooks.com. I think he said it was going to be up to date. I haven't seen it yet, so. But you can also get a hold of me for that too. Is there a place that's convenient to make this slide available for everybody? Google Drive?
Is it Google Drive?
Google Drive? Is there an email list or?
No, but, I could get emails and then get them to you, afterwards.
Perfect, yeah.
Okay. Oh, you said text you too? What's that? Oh, you have his phone number? Oh, they have your phone number, he said he's gonna text you.
Correct. email me at alexfirethunder@littlewound.us. And it's on at Thursdays at 7:30 for an hour, or hour and a half usually, 7:30 to 9.
No, but I can write it down on a paper for you. That
And
is-
then
So that when your card book, I'll go write it on your info on a paper for them.
good. We're 2 classes in, but I recorded both classes on YouTube, and there's a Word document, or it's in the description actually. The script of the story is in there, so you can watch the YouTube videos and get caught up. Join us next Thursday. It's really fun. It's a lot of fun.
All right, I think that's it for questions.
Well, Nona anazota nakapicha hechi wokila chicha polomita. Sha ke wochicha kapita lo down go. Deha upo na vaccine ki hai ijupo.
Wopila chiche.
Doksha ke.
Doksha ke.
Now he comes back.
Hello, George.
Hey, Jordan.
You missed class.
George Glee.
Hey, George. Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes, you did. Let Alex do it.
I know. Alex Taboo money.
Alex, we have money here.
Hey. cut that. Okay.
Oh, thanks.
Not the mic. I used to go my stuff to my truck. Obala has ear wide.
Question for Alex.